Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Amanda. Good morning. We are living in interesting times. Some fundamental standards that we have had for decades and perhaps taken for granted have changed. Health is at stake with the COVID-19 pandemic, and ordinary life patterns such as work, school, shopping, and just getting together has changed. Even our civic institutions like government and security like police, our news, our community, lots of things have changed. Even social gatherings with families and especially in our religious community with services. Many things have changed that we have taken for granted. Now, this would be a time to seek reliable guide and answers. The Dharma has guided people for 2,500 years in many different situations, in many different countries and cultures. This is a dependable truth. Now, I realize that this new video format has enabled people who perhaps are not too familiar with Buddhism to view it. And so I thought this would be an ideal time to go back to the basics and talk about some basics of Buddhism. Now, there are other sources that I would recommend, and you may see the links given on screen. But there's everydaybuddhist.org, which is the Orange County online classes, very good. Our BCA has a Committee for Buddhist Education, and they have many YouTube videos on past and future seminars. The Todo Institute, Greg Creek, is also available online. And our own website, BuddhistTempleSanDiego.org, offers our videos on Dharma talks given by myself and others here. We also have speakers in Japanese and Spanish, and also some of our past seminars. So all of these can give new people an idea of Shin Buddhism. And it's great that we have so many different and varied ways of presenting Buddhism, because all of us take in information in different ways. And so to have these different venues allows each person to perhaps learn in the way they're accustomed to. Now, what I wanted to do today was start with a story about a young person I met some time ago. He was about 30, and he had an interesting story. This person, Sid, led a very nice life. He grew up in a very affluent neighborhood. His parents were quite well off. And so in his childhood, he just led quite an ideal life. And he grew up just feeling comfortable and accustomed to this lifestyle. But as a teenager, he wandered off into some not so good neighborhoods, less affluent. And these were neighborhoods that, of course, his parents really didn't want him to go into. But here he saw a different style of life. There was poverty, there were homeless people, places were not real clean, and he even felt threatened at times. But this was a very different life than what he had been accustomed to. He also liked watching nature programs on TV, and what he saw kind of bothered him. He liked the natural, wildlife type of things, and especially the ones in Africa where he saw animals taking the life of other animals. And even with the same species, different packs of animals, like hyenas or wild dogs, fighting other groups or packs of wild dogs and so forth. And so this was kind of really disturbing to him, that there was so much violence in life. And perhaps similar to our own lives, he had a cousin who was very antagonistic, always kind of in conflict and challenging him. And so there was this, rivalry going on. And perhaps we have had something like that in our life. Now, he was able to go to a good university, graduated, did very well. And because of that, he got a very good job. He got married, had a lovely wife and a young son. And he was living a very successful life. And then he had some events happen in his life that really had him questioning things. A friend of his own age, got sick with an illness and was hospitalized for quite some time. And his grandfather, that he really enjoyed while he was a young boy, had gotten older and was limited in his movements. He had to be moved around in a wheelchair, and he was very infirm. And what shook him up the most was that his uncle, that was very successful in life, had a very enjoyable life, suddenly died of a heart attack. And so at the funeral, he had questions, what is life about? You could be very successful and yet life could end like that. He was so troubled by this that he decided that he wanted to find out more about life and all that went on. He was so troubled that he left his job and he actually left his family. He joined the seminary and he was there for about 6 years and he did very well there, but he found that that really didn't answer his life either. And so he left the seminary and decided to take a solo retreat where he went off by himself and really did some deep introspection. And what he did was he looked back, he looked into the way nature worked, how life itself worked. And then he looked into human nature. And a third area, he looked into his own life and saw how he thought and why he acted the way he did. And this man was very smart and exceptional. And in this deep introspection, he discovered some basic truths. And with that, he began to share that with others. And he wrote books or he told stories, and actually his followers wrote books. Now, I'm wondering if this type of life, if we can identify with that to be similar to some of ours, that, we may have led pretty good lives, and then we have these situations occurring to us, like the problems we're having now. And that, we might wonder, what is life really about? That there are some people who are very wealthy and well off, and yet they might be uncaring about other people. And then there are those who may not be so well off financially, and yet they're having a happy life and that they're satisfied. So how does life work? How do we manage our life? Now, part of my story is not true. I didn't really meet this man. I heard about him some years ago. In fact, this man's name we might call Sid, which is short for Siddhartha Gautama. In other words, this was the life of the Buddha. And his truth was so strong that masters and followers of him really listened, and they made commentaries and wrote books many centuries later. And so what we have is what we call the DHARMA, the truth that the Buddha discovered, and that it has been expounded upon for centuries, for over 2,500 years. And what he talked about was the true nature of life at the deepest, deepest level. And so what he discovered were things, and I think we're familiar with these things, but then kind of review them. He noticed that everything changes, everything is moving, and it's unpredictable. There are natural disasters. We even have changes in our personal relationships. People are unpredictable. And what we might call this is impermanent. The other thing he discovered is that things are connected. Everything affects everything else on this planet. All living things need nutrition, and we take it from other life and also non-living elements. So life does feed on life, and this is the truth. Plants, animals, minerals, there is a balance. And even the refuse of one becomes the nutrient for another, as we have oxygen, carbon dioxide. Plants and animals, the excrement can become nutrition for other life forms. And then he realized that there are connections to people and everything else. And some are, good for us and others are not. And he called this interdependence. Everything affects every other thing. So we have these things and we wonder, with everything changing and all these relationships, the world seems to be kind of chaotic, dynamic, and we're unable to influence all these great changes that's happening. And we can't predict what is good or bad, but we're in this. So what is the solution? And we might think about this in our present life as we watch or know that there is television. And we know that there may be 100 channels going on all the time, and this is occurring continuously. Now, we can't watch 100 channels at the same time. We can only watch one at a time. So we have a little remote and we click from channel to channel. That's like seeing reality. Now, I'm pretty good at switching from one channel to another. And sometimes I try to watch about three, one after another. But what is real is that we can only watch one channel at a time. And that's like our mind. Our mind can only see one thing at a time. And so what the Buddha realized was that it is the mind that determines our reality. We can't watch 100 channels at the same time, and we can't watch all of life. And so it is to develop our minds to look at life from a point of view that is closest to true reality. And this is why we say Buddhism is about waking up. It's not about deciding whether we're good or bad, but to look at life from a point that can help not only us, but all others. And so the Buddha developed what is called the Four Noble Truths. And these four different sections I like to put in this quadrant diagram, where the first noble truth might be discontent, often called suffering, dukkha. And that is basically means that life is like riding in a cart with an off-centered wheel. In other words, the axle hole of a wheel is off-centered, and so the cart you may be riding in has a bumpy ride. Now, the cause of that is this attachment or concentration on ourself, our ego self. And the Buddha talked about this sense that we always have of greed and wanting more, or hatred, trying to keep others away. And then basic ignorance, not knowing, and perhaps choosing what is not best for all. Now, what's beneficial is that with the third noble truth, which is bliss or nirvana, it is a balance of dukkha. And often we think that we'd like to be in that third quadrant on the upper right. But if we think about impermanence, can we stay there all the time? And this is why I think this quadrant tells us about the Four Noble Truths in a little more realistic way. Because the fourth one, the path to this status of bliss, are the Eightfold Path. 8 things that he recommended that we could do to balance this egocentric way of life. And so it's not so much that we want to be in that third quadrant in the upper right, but we might want to be just in that center, right down the line, that vertical line, to balance our discontent with our bliss, and to balance our ego desires with the Eightfold Path. And so we have these different things that we can be aware of: our perspective on life, our thoughts, speech, conduct, our livelihood, things we do. With some effort, we can keep our mindfulness and meditation. And I've talked about perhaps going the other way, that in the morning we can meditate, keep in mind during the day something, our focus, and that aligning our mind with what might be true. And that takes some effort. And with that effort during the day in whatever we're doing in our livelihood, it may affect our conduct and speech, and ultimately our thought. And then basically our perspective. So whatever we see in life, we may have a balanced life. So we're living in this world where everything is happening. And the Buddha's awakening is that there are means to which we can help us through this turmoil that we might be facing. And that he mentioned a few other things. And one is the 5 precepts. And these are things that help guide us living among others. And that is not lying, not cheating or stealing, not killing, not taking intoxicants, and not abusing sex. So these 5 things are very helpful in helping us through life. Now, sometimes we can't abide completely by these, but these are our guidelines. And then we have the 6 paramitas. First one being charity or selfless giving, just being generous with ourselves, not only material things, but just gifts to others. And then there's discipline or sila. And this might mean following the precepts. And with that, we might learn patience. And with patience, there might be also perseverance. And then trying to keep our mindfulness. And then ultimately, wisdom. Now, these 6 paramitas are a way for us to work our way through the many things that we have in life. And we'll be talking more about this. But what we're seeing here is that we have a complex life. Siddhartha Gautama became the Buddha, realized these things on how the earth works, how the universe works, and beyond that. And with that, he gave us a guide. And we will be going back to these things and seeing how we can direct our heart and mind so that it helps us through this life and helps us live with others in harmony and peace. And so with that, we'll continue with this thought in future talks. So please join me at this time to express our deep appreciation to the Buddha for this discovery of awakening to true and real life. So with our hands together in Gasho, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Namo Amida Butsu, Amandas Nama.